Hey guys, welcome back. Alright, so this is going to be another electrical video. Some of this stuff I just got to get it out of the way, get parts on the way. We'll get back to some mechanical work while we're waiting on parts to come in. Alright, so we bought a ton of gauges and I think we're not going to put them in the car at this time. I want to get this car to the racetrack, and it might look like an empty shell, but this is actually more or less what the car is going to look like. There's not much going in this thing. It's basically just a shell with a drivetrain and the minimum stuff to connect the dots, make it run. So we're going to skip the gauges for now. They may get put back in the future. But here's what we do want. So I kind of broke this down through a couple of sheets of paper and an Excel sheet. I need to be able to drive the car and know that certain things are okay, but I don't necessarily need to know that the oil pressure is 62 psi. What I need to know is, do I have oil pressure? Do I have enough oil pressure? That's really all I need to know. Same thing for coolant. I don't care what the temperature is. Am I overheating or am I not? That kind of thing. So to that end, we're going to put the sensors in place, only the critical ones. We're still not doing everything I'd like, but we're going to do the critical stuff. We're going to put the critical sensors, we're going to monitor stuff, and we're going to have a small display. So if we were sitting in the car, I'm going to put the phone where my eyeballs would be. So this is my view if I was in the car, right? So right here, kind of center of the screen, we're going to have a little panel, and it's going to have some lights on it. You can probably guess the colors. A big green light, some yellow lights, and some red lights. We'll get into that in a minute. But that's going to basically go, if we were to zoom in this area, somewhere right there. And the cool thing is, when you're racing, you'll have a single green light. And if that light's green, that's all you need to know. Green is good. Green means go. Everything's okay. So from a racing standpoint, while you're racing, while you're staging, you should always see the green light. It should never turn off. And if it ever does turn off, that means you got a yellow or a red light. So basically, if you see a yellow, you can probably keep racing. If you see a red, unless you're, racing for a title or racing for money, then you should probably get out of it. So let me show you what that's going to look like, because I think this is going to be it's going to be an important feature that's going to make the car more enjoyable. And let me just expand on that before I show you, because this is really important. One big thing when you build a street car, I could do a whole video on this. People build cars that are fast, but you also have to build cars that are enjoyable. Not just fast and fun, but enjoyable. Part of enjoyable is you have to trust it. I've had friends of mine, sorry if y'all are listening and know who you are, but I've had a couple of friends of mine that were actually surprised. They rode in my car how much I beat on this thing. Like one of my friends I took for a ride, this is years ago, and we made about 25 pulls going down the interstate. And I was running, I don't know, either 30 or 40 pounds, I don't remember, but it was a lot. It was enough. And he couldn't believe I did that. He thought I was just going to blow the car up and we were going to be walking home. He couldn't believe I drove it that way. And that's because his car would break. He couldn't, his car wasn't that fast anyway, but if he drove it hard, it would break. It wasn't real solid. And so that that takes away from the fun. Even if you have a cool car, it needs to be reliable. So, and you need to trust it. So having a warning system in place, when I see that green light, I trust that everything's working. I don't have to, I know it's working. I can see that it's working. I know that, the system's being monitored, all my stuff's good, and I can just race. So it puts your mind at ease. That's why we're doing this. It's going to slow the car down technically, because I'm adding weight, but it's really going to make it more enjoyable, and I intend to enjoy the crap out of this. Okay, with that said, let me show you how we're doing the warning system. Alright, so this is roughly what it's going to look like. So this big giant one in the top here, this is where our green light goes. And just to show you, here it is. This thing's huge. It's big. Anyway, big ass green light. Real easy to see. That's it. Now we can tell below that there's another row. And then below that there's another row. So this top row, these are your red lights. And the bottom row, these are going to be your yellow lights. And then between the red and the yellow here, I'm going to have a label printed out. I don't have the sheet in front of me. Sorry, kind of bad for a video. But I can probably remember most of these. So for example, oil pressure. You'd have a yellow and a red. So for example, this is set up for racing. So When I'm racing, I would expect my oil pressure to probably be, I don't actually know what it is yet because I haven't measured, but let's just say 50 psi minimum. So I might have this light here. If it ever goes below 50, this turns yellow. What would cause my oil pressure to go below 50? Well, maybe it does on its own, I don't know, but it could be a wore out motor, it could be fuel dilution, it could be the oil is just too hot because oil thins out the hotter you get it. So if the oil gets too hot, this could turn, you could start losing pressure. You could be low on oil, you could be sucking air, cavitating the pump, foaming the oil. There's probably other stuff too. Anyway, you get the idea. A lot of things could cause that to turn yellow. Red. What would be red? Well, 0 could definitely be red, but frankly, if you're racing, there's probably a number where this should just turn red because you're going to tear shit up. So if this turned on yellow at, say, 50, 50 might be a number that the engine would stay alive, but something's off. And then maybe 40 or 35 or something, it would turn red. Basically, this should never, never, never turn red. And this should only turn yellow if you had, like, say, high oil temps or maybe excessive fuel dilution or something like that. So the numbers I'm giving you are an example, but the point is the numbers are spec'd to where if something that's cautionary happens, you'll get a yellow light. So a perfect example, like say the next one was coolant temperature, just as example. I have a thermostat of stock temperature, I believe, like 185 or something. So once I drive the car and I've raced it, say the cooling system's working like it's supposed to, and basically no matter what, my water never goes over 195, never. Well, then I'll set this maybe 5 degrees above that at 200. So it's like, hey, if you ever go, at 200, this yellow light turns on. It's like, okay, that should probably never happen, but maybe on a really hot day, maybe if like, I just made like back-to-back-to-back passes and I'm, fixing to make another pass and it's not really getting time to cool down, stuff like that. Okay, you're going to get a yellow light potentially. Red light, that's going to be even higher. So if this was 200, I would expect at 200, that's a temporary event. So this red light might be at like, let's just say 210, 215. I'd give it some margin. This should never happen. That's the point. So yellow lights mean something is going out of spec or it's like out of its nominal range, but you could probably still operate. Red means stop the engine unless you want to destroy stuff. So essentially we're going to go down the list. So you'll have like say oil pressure, coolant temperature. We're going to do coolant pressure. We're going to throw a pressure sensor on the cooling system. So as you guys have probably noticed, when your car's cold, your radiator hoses are kind of soft. But once it heats up, they're supposed to firm up. That's because the cooling system is under pressure from the radiator cap. Radiator cap is actually the regulator that sets the pressure in the cooling system, assuming you don't have a leak or any of that. So we'll have a coolant pressure. That way, if you ever, say we get a leak in the cooling system, like a tiny leak won't really show up. But if you get a big enough leak, the first thing that happens is you start losing coolant. Well, as soon as that happens, you lose your pressure. And then as you lose coolant, if you lose too much, it'll start to overheat. And then once it overheats, the temperature goes up, and then you'd see your warning light for temperature. But way before you saw the warning light, the first thing that happened was you get the leak and lose pressure. So by having a pressure light, that kind of tells you like the integrity of the system, that you don't have a leak. So as long as my coolant pressure is good, I know I don't have a leak in my cooling system. Or very likely I don't. So we said oil pressure, we'd have oil temperature. We're going to have fuel pressure. We'll throw that in there. There's a few of these. I forget what all of them are. But yeah, we're going to be monitoring several things, and it'll give me peace of mind when I'm driving. The last thing, and this is still a bit to be determined, but this system, I'm still architecting this. I believe I'm going to use an Arduino, a couple of them. So this little panel is going to be full of lamps, and on the back side I'll have an Arduino embedded in this, and it'll be driving all these different lights or lamps. And then to get all the sensor data to the Arduino, I believe what I'm going to do is on the car, let me show you. Okay, so what I think I'm doing is on the car, let's say in the floorboard, say for example down here we put our ECU, well right next to it I'm going to put an Arduino, and I'm going to pull a lot of sensor data from the MS3 Pro and also some dedicated sensors, because my MS3 Pro, it only has so many analog inputs. I only get like 3 extras, kind of lame. So the Arduino will have some extras. I can feed additional sensors to it. It gets all the data, converts like analog voltages to actual sensor values. Perhaps data record them. Hadn't thought about that. Maybe we'll do that too. But it's going to take all that and decide it'll figure out the data, and essentially it's going to transmit the data over here to our warning system. How we're going to get it across is also to be determined. My buddy was telling me about like NRF. I forget what it stands for, like near radio frequency maybe. I might try that because it's wireless. It's kind of cool, but mostly trying it just to experiment. It only has to go like 4 feet. You could do CAN bus. That's kind of the standard in automotive. They sell CAN bus stuff for Arduino, so maybe we'll do that. NRF looks easier though. Another cool thing if we do NRF is I only have to run power and ground. So even though this thing might have like 15 or 16 lights or whatever, if I run just power and ground and then I just use NRF to wirelessly transmit the data, that's kind of cool. That means that this module up here only has power and ground, less wiring. And then if I ever want to like add stuff, you can just transmit new data. So like I could basically build an updated warning panel, take the old one out, put the new one in, update the software, and I don't have to run new wires. So that's kind of cool. That's true with CAN bus as well. It'd just be 4 wires instead of 2. But the alternative would be, say I had an Arduino down here that's measuring the sensors and it's driving the lights. Well, depending on how many lights you have, if you got 17 lights, that's 17 wires plus a ground. And then if you ever want to change it, that requires wiring in the vehicle to add more wires, 1 for every lamp. So that's why doing it this way, just putting the controller up inside the unit and then transmitting the data to it, makes upgrades down the road easier too. So I definitely like that. So anyway, that's going to wrap up the warning system architecture. We're going to get this good enough and just build it. We've still got, probably date the video, I believe today is Monday. So I've still got a whole week to work on this car. And basically this weekend we were doing conceptual stuff and planning and speccing things, and that's just part of it. Last time we got a big pile of work done, it was all mechanical. There's really no electrical work done. But the electrical is the big thing left. Now, you can't really finalize, like I'm not running wires until every part in the car is in place. Probably save that for a later video. But I've learned from that, don't run wires until all the parts are in place. Connect the dots with wires. Wires are easy to adjust. Brackets and other parts are not easy to adjust. So wiring is the last thing you do. So for now, we're figuring out what the parts are going to be, the switches, the panels, where things are going to go. And we're going to get everything on a bracket and everything located in the vehicle where we want it, where it's accessible, it's easy to service. Get all the other stuff done, hoses, and basically have the car like almost ready to go. Then we'll wire it. Wiring will be one of the last things we do, but it's one of the first things we have to think about. Otherwise, you start putting things in places where you wish you could run wires, or it's difficult to wire, or it's difficult to service. A huge thing, sorry to keep rambling, but we're going to do our damnedest not to pile a bunch of wiring under the dash, way up in there where it's hard to work on. So that whole panel we talked about earlier in a previous video, it's going to go like right here. And if you were just kneeling down here, like by the car, it would be taking up this whole area, and it would just be very easy to access. So I think that's going to be cool. All right, guys, it's going to wrap this one up. Hope y'all enjoyed this, and until next time, y'all take it easy.